Rich Millionaire's Secret Trip, with Mistress exposed when pregnant wife follows them. A tempest was brewing behind the closed doors of the Harrington mansion, and few would suspect the scandal that was about to unfold. Alexander Harrington, a charismatic millionaire known for his empire of luxury hotels, was preparing for a secret vacation, one that promised lavish indulgence and illicit romance. His pregnant wife, Diana Harrington, had sensed something was amiss. Whispers of a mysterious companion reached her ears, fueling her worst fears. Determined to uncover the truth, Diana set out on a journey that would expose deceit, shatter trust, and reveal shocking secrets hidden beneath a polished facade. Brace yourself for the drama that would forever change their lives. Alexander Harrington was a man whose name alone evoked prestige, influence, and wealth. He wasn't born into a legacy of abundance, rather. He had crafted an empire with his own two hands. Decades ago, Alexander's father, Benjamin Harrington, had left the family with nothing but a string of empty promises. As a teenager, Alexander vowed he would never allow himself to fall into that same trap of mediocrity or disappointment. By his late 30s, he had built a business portfolio that rivaled the country's top real estate moguls, luxury resorts, high-end condominiums, and an exclusive chain of boutique hotels. From an outsider's perspective, Alexander's life was a picture-perfect dream, an elegant mansion perched atop a gentle hill in upstate New York, a fleet of European sports cars, private jets, and access to some of the most prestigious social circles. Moreover, he had married Diana, a strikingly beautiful woman whose poise and generosity were admired by all. Together, they embodied a modern fairy tale, or so it seemed. Diana Harrington, née Spencer, had been raised in a world far from extravagance. She was the eldest daughter of a school librarian and a factory manager in rural Virginia. Their humble life taught her the value of perseverance, kindness, and family unity. When she arrived in New York for college, she was determined to become successful on her own terms. Fate, however, had a more complicated journey in store. She met Alexander at a charity gala hosted by the Harrington Foundation. The young man was immediately captivated by her wit and warm personality. Their courtship was swift, and before long, they were exchanging vows in a lavish garden ceremony that included the crème de la crème of society. 7 years later, Diana was pregnant with their first child, a child she believed would bring a new dimension of warmth into the Harrington household. Their union seemed as robust as ever, but Diana felt a strange drift in Alexander. He had become more distant, unusually preoccupied. His phone calls and late-night messages were growing suspicious. When the first faint rumor about his business travels reached her ears, Diana initially brushed it aside. After all, she trusted her husband. Why on earth would a loyal and wealthy man risk everything by sneaking around? Still, the tension was palpable. In the Harrington mansion, staff members like Morgan Redwood, the longtime butler, and Fiona Ling, the personal cook, wore polite, neutral expressions. Diana suspected they knew more than they let on. Even her best friend, Charlotte Williams, had ventured a theory. Men with too much power are easily tempted, Charlotte had said in a hushed tone. Diana had defended her husband outwardly, but inside, seeds of unease were taking root. Alexander, meanwhile, was planning a trip he insisted was purely business. The location? A luxurious resort in the Bahamas that his company was interested in acquiring. For a man who rarely involved himself in day-to-day negotiations, the details of this trip seemed suspiciously meticulous. And the mistress he planned to bring, Selena Moretti, was anticipating a getaway that would alter the course of all their lives forever. When had the affair really begun? It was difficult to pinpoint the exact moment Alexander slipped from the realm of fidelity into infidelity. Some said a crack in the marriage formed during the stressful period of expansions and mergers. Others speculated about the glittering social circles, where wealthy men found themselves surrounded by opportunistic admirers. But if anyone had asked Selina Moretti, she'd have said it all started the day she waltzed into Alexander's corner office with a proposal for a new spa franchise. Selina was not your stereotypical mistress. 32 years old, poised and financially secure in her own right, she was a rising star in the wellness industry. Hailing from Rome, she had moved to the United States to study business management, launching her line of spa treatments soon after graduating. She exuded confidence and intellect, traits that intrigued Alexander from the moment she first proposed her partnership. Initially, their conversations were strictly business. Selina discussed marketing strategies, potential expansions, and ways to infuse old-world European techniques into modern spa facilities. Alexander was impressed by her acumen and offered to invest in her brand. What began as late-night work sessions soon evolved into dinners at exclusive restaurants, where business talk gradually gave way to personal anecdotes. She laughed at his jokes, listened attentively to his stories of overcoming childhood hardship, and fed his ego with subtle compliments that made him feel powerful and appreciated. In turn, Alexander found himself entranced by Selina's adventurous spirit. She seemed refreshingly candid, never tiptoeing around him just because of his status. In her eyes, he was not just Alexander Harrington, the millionaire, but a man with dreams, insecurities, and a deep-seated need for validation. The first time they crossed the line was after a gala event in Miami, organized by the Harrington Resort Group. Selina attended as Alexander's business associate, dazzling the crowd in a silver gown that hugged her figure. As soon as the cameras were off and the guests had gone, he invited her to an after-party at his hotel suite. There was champagne, stolen glances, and an electric tension that neither one could resist. One kiss became two, and by the time dawn arrived, their fates were intertwined in a decision that neither was fully prepared to face. For a while, the affair was kept in the shadows. Fleeting trysts in private residences, coded text messages, and a hush among the staff at Harrington Enterprises. Yet rumors have a way of escaping even the tightest chambers. Whispers floated about, capturing the attention of a few loyal employees. Thomas Maxwell, Alexander's lawyer, noticed unusual hotel charges, while Natalie Parker, Alexander's personal assistant, started to receive vague phone calls from a woman who refused to leave her name. Each piece of gossip slowly aligned to form a puzzle that not many dared to solve except Diana, the wife with an intuitive heart. But for Alexander, the escape was euphoric. He felt invincible, as though he were experiencing life with fresh vigor. However, everything was about to take a drastic turn when Diana, pushed to the brink of suspicion, chose to follow him on his business trip. Little did he know, the meticulously curated world he'd built around his indiscretions was about to crumble. Diana Harrington woke up one crisp morning to find herself alone in the king-sized bed she shared with Alexander. Her pregnancy had progressed into its second trimester, and every movement from the baby had begun to fill her with a mixture of excitement and fear. She was craving her husband's emotional support more than ever, yet she found him increasingly absent physically and mentally. The final straw that shook Diana's fragile sense of security occurred 2 nights prior. She had been in the library searching for a novel to read when she happened upon Alexander's laptop. It was open to a series of emails referencing an upcoming trip to the Bahamas, but the tone felt too personal for a standard business venture. Words like romantic dinner, sunset cruise, and private suite leaped off the screen, sending a shiver through her. She had tried to remain calm, but her heart hammered in her chest. Confronting him directly was an option, but she sensed he would either lie or dismiss her worries as paranoia. Instead, she confided in Charlotte Williams, her longtime best friend. Over a cup of chamomile tea in the mansion's sunlit terrace, Diana poured out her fears, tears staining her cheeks. Charlotte listened carefully, occasionally squeezing Diana's hand in silent support. Then her friend said something that resonated deeply. "Diana, you owe it to yourself and your child to find the truth. Don't let him gaslight you into thinking you're imagining everything." That evening, Diana reached out to Thomas Maxwell, the family lawyer, seeking advice. Although Thomas was bound by confidentiality to Alexander, he hinted that Alexander's upcoming trip was more personal than professional. He stopped short of disclosing specifics, but the implication was clear. When the call ended, Diana felt an odd combination of dread and determination. She knew what she had to do. With Charlotte's help, Diana booked a plane ticket to the Bahamas. If Alexander was indeed going there on business, she would confirm it for herself. She planned her departure carefully, pretending to accompany Charlotte on a spa weekend in Boston. Meanwhile, she made arrangements with a discreet personal investigator, Wilson Barnett, to track her husband's movements. Her mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Yet the evidence was too glaring to ignore. The biggest risk, however, was her own health. Traveling during pregnancy wasn't advisable without caution, and stress could harm both mother and child. But Diana felt that the cost of ignorance was even greater. How could she bring a baby into a life built on deceit? On the morning of her flight, Diana placed a soft palm on her growing belly and whispered, "I promise I'll protect you. No matter what happens, I'll do what's best for us both." Then she left the Harrington mansion, her mind clouded with fear, heartbreak, and a steely resolve to uncover the truth behind Alexander's hidden escapades. Alexander had never felt such a heady mix of excitement and trepidation. He told himself that this Bahamian trip was essential for finalizing business deals. At least, that was the official stance he presented to staff and colleagues. In reality, he intended it to be a romantic escape with Selina Moretti. The plan had been orchestrated with painstaking attention to detail: 2 first-class tickets to Nassau, a private car waiting upon arrival, and an opulent suite at a 5-star resort perched on a secluded beach. Selina was already at the airport lounge when Alexander arrived, wearing oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured half her face. Her bold, sophisticated style attracted curious glances from fellow travelers. She flashed him a smile that seemed to say, "We're really doing this." In that moment, Alexander felt the world shrink to just the two of them, a bubble of secrecy and passion that, for a few days, he hoped would shield them from the prying eyes of the media and the demands of everyday life. Even so, Alexander couldn't fully relax. In the back of his mind, he carried the guilt of leaving his pregnant wife behind with a contrived excuse. The echo of her voice from their last conversation replayed in his mind. She had asked him if everything was all right, a hint of worry lacing her tone. He remembered forcing a smile and replying, "Everything's fine, darling. I'll be back before you know it." That memory now felt like a knife twisting slowly in his gut. When their private car reached the resort, the sight was breathtaking. The sun glistened off turquoise waters, lush palm trees swayed gently in the ocean breeze, and the concierge greeted them with cold towels and glasses of champagne. Selina clung to Alexander's arm as they walked through the marble-floored lobby and entered the elevator that led to their penthouse suite. Inside, they found a room with panoramic ocean views, a spacious balcony, and a private plunge pool. Rose petals adorned the bed, and a complimentary bottle of vintage wine awaited them. Selina closed the door and stepped closer to Alexander. Finally, she whispered, as if the entire trip had been a clandestine mission. He couldn't resist kissing her, forgetting for a moment all the moral lines he had crossed to get there. This was the life he'd craved: unbridled passion, freedom from responsibilities, and a companion who made him feel young and spirited again. Meanwhile, several miles away, Diana was landing on the same island. Her heart raced with every passing minute, torn between the hope that she was wrong about Alexander and the fear that she was right. She had told no one but her friend Charlotte and the private investigator Wilson Barnett about this trip. While Alexander and Selina were settling into their romantic cocoon, Diana was navigating a different route, one that would soon lead her straight into the heart of the affair. And in her growing belly, life stirred, unaware of the turmoil unfolding in the adult's world. Diana's flight touched down in Nassau under a brilliant midday sun. She felt the damp heat immediately, oppressive yet strangely invigorating. Clutching her small suitcase, she made her way to a taxi stand. Inside the rattling cab, her mind swung between panic and determination. She had chosen a modest hotel on the island, far from the lavish resorts that typically dotted the horizon. The plan was simple: find Alexander's location, gather proof of his infidelity, and then decide what to do next. But nothing felt simple in her heart. Her friend Charlotte had insisted on coming along, but was tied up with a family emergency at the last minute. Feeling alone in a foreign place, Diana steeled herself. If Charlotte's instincts were correct, she would soon be face to face with an ugly truth. She reminded herself that she was doing this not just for her peace of mind, but for the baby growing inside her. Just as Diana settled into her modest hotel room, Wilson Barnett phoned. "I've tracked Alexander's reservation to the Orchid K Resort," he said, his tone crisp and professional. "He's registered under a company account, but there's a Miss Selina Moretti listed as well." Diana's heart clenched painfully. The confirmation was both relief and heartbreak. Determined to see for herself, Diana rented a car and drove to Orchid K. The resort was a lush paradise, nestled behind towering gates and guarded by vigilant security. Guests arrived in sleek limousines, escorted by uniformed staff. Before leaving her room, Diana had donned a loose sundress and a wide-brimmed hat, hoping to blend in among the other tourists. She wasn't sure how she'd gain entry without a reservation, but fate often rewards the bold. At the entrance, Diana told the guard she was meeting a guest. She offered a false name and flashed her most confident smile. It was a risk, but her poise and refined appearance, coupled with the commotion of arriving guests, allowed her to slip through without too many questions. Once inside, she found herself standing in the opulent lobby, feeling like an intruder in a fairy tale. Chandeliers dripped crystal sparkles onto polished marble floors, and the air smelled of exotic flowers and sweet coconut. Guests drifted by in designer clothes, sipping from glasses of pineapple juice, and somewhere within this gorgeous labyrinth, her husband was enjoying a secret holiday with another woman. Just then, a staff member approached, sensing her uncertainty. "Ma'am, can I help you find something?" For a moment, Diana's courage wavered. She stammered an excuse about meeting a friend, her voice trembling slightly. The staff member smiled politely. "Of course. The suites are on the upper floors. Let me check if they're expecting you." In that instant, Diana realized how easily her plan could unravel. Panic surged through her. In desperation, she turned away and pretended to receive a phone call. The staff member hovered, then got distracted by a rowdy group of tourists. Diana seized her chance to slip further into the resort, guided only by the flicker of adrenaline pumping in her veins. And so began her search through the sun-soaked corridors of Orchid K, each step drawing her closer to the devastating proof she needed and further into a labyrinth of danger, heartbreak, and revelations she could never have anticipated. In their penthouse suite, Alexander and Selina were lounging by the private plunge pool, savoring a midday breeze that swept in from the ocean. Selina wore a stylish white swimsuit, her hair cascading over her shoulders, while Alexander lounged with a cocktail in hand. From the balcony, the view was a postcard of pristine beaches and turquoise waters. The scene was idyllic, almost enough to make Alexander forget the perilous truth of his situation. They had spent the morning exploring the resort's amenities, a luxurious spa session, a stroll on the private shoreline, and a decadent brunch featuring fresh fruit and gourmet pastries. For Selina, the entire trip felt like a dream spun from desire. She remembered the cautious thrill of sneaking around in New York, but here, in the Bahamas, with the sun on their faces and no prying eyes, or so they thought, it was as if their affair had finally found its stage. Alexander tried to maintain a sense of calm, but his internal disquiet grew with each passing minute. Every time his phone buzzed, he tensed, half expecting a message from Diana, or perhaps from Thomas Maxwell, alerting him to some unforeseen complication. He muttered a silent prayer that nothing would shatter the delicate balance he had so carefully built, at least not until he returned home. Selina noticed his distraction. Resting a hand on his shoulder, she asked, "Is something bothering you?" Her tone was gentle, but her gaze was piercing. She had learned to read Alexander's moods with ease. "Just thinking about business," he lied smoothly. "Mergers, expansions, my mind never fully takes a vacation." He forced a grin to reassure her. Selina seemed to accept his explanation, though a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Their suite was a cavern of indulgences, a plush king-size bed draped in high-thread count linens, an enormous bathroom featuring a sunken tub with jets, and sliding glass doors leading to the panoramic balcony. On the living room table lay a folder labeled "Investment Prospects," which Alexander used as a prop whenever he felt the need to sustain the illusion of a business trip. In truth, the folder contained little more than generic brochures and a few printouts. Across the resort, Diana roamed the hallways, clinging to anonymity. She had narrowly avoided several hotel employees by ducking behind decorative plants or slipping into side corridors. The polished floors and tropical decor gave the place a surreal quality. She passed couples holding hands, families laughing with children in tow, and friends sipping cocktails in the lounge. All around her, people were celebrating life. The irony bit into her soul. She was there to confront the possibility that her own life was unraveling. Eventually, Diana found herself outside a grand suite on one of the top floors. Her pulse quickened when she read the name A. Harrington on the occupant list, posted by the door, a standard detail for VIP guests, requesting privacy, ironically pinned there for staff convenience. In that moment, she realized how close she was to unveiling the truth. Steeling her nerves, she pressed her ear to the door. Laughter and the soft lull of music filtered through, confirming that someone was inside. If she wanted to confirm everything without being detected, she needed to find a way in or wait for them to emerge. At that thought, Diana sank onto a nearby bench, her belly feeling heavier than ever. She closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. She was about to cross a line from which there was no return. Diana didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, the door to Alexander's suite opened. She watched from her discreet vantage point around the corner, heart hammering against her ribs. First, she saw Alexander step out, looking effortlessly sophisticated in tailored linen pants and a crisp white shirt. He briefly checked his phone, then turned back to address someone else. When Selina emerged, it felt as though Diana's entire world tilted off its axis. Selina was stunning, tall, confident, and radiating an elegance that suggested she wasn't merely a fling, She placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder and laughed at something he said. The casual intimacy in that gesture was enough to make Diana's stomach churn. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It stood before her, clear as day. With mounting dread, Diana slipped further behind the corner, praying neither of them would notice her. She watched her husband and his mistress walk arm in arm toward the elevators. Any illusions she might have harbored about Alexander's loyalty shattered at that moment. She felt the sting of tears forming in her eyes, but she refused to break down in the hallway. Summoning her resolve, Diana quietly followed them. She maintained a cautious distance, slipping into another elevator once she saw which floor they selected, ground level. When she reached the lobby, she spotted them heading toward the resort's outdoor area, presumably for a day of leisure under the sun. She tracked them through the manicured gardens, passing exotic flowers and lush greenery. Eventually, they reached a secluded cabana near the beach. Several resort guests were about, but the area was exclusive enough for Alexander and Selina to feel private. Diana hovered at a distance, partly concealed by a row of tall palm trees. She witnessed them order drinks, exchange flirtatious smiles, and share a kiss that lasted far too long for a man who was about to become a father with another woman. At one point, she heard Selina address him by name, her voice tinged with a playful affection. Alexander responded with a tender caress across Selina's cheek. The magnitude of the betrayal struck Diana like a physical blow. She swayed, momentarily dizzy, pressing a hand to her belly in an instinctive gesture of protection. "Focus," she told herself. "I need proof." She drew out her phone and took a few pictures, her fingers trembling so badly that she almost dropped the device. Each photograph felt like a dagger to the heart, but she knew it was crucial. If she confronted him without evidence, he would deny everything. After capturing what she needed, she sank onto a hidden bench, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. For a fleeting second, she considered marching up to them, screaming her pain into Alexander's face. Yet a deeper sense of self-preservation and the welfare of her unborn child urged caution. There would be a time and place for confrontation. Right now, she had to keep her head clear. She took one last look at the couple living proof of Alexander's infidelity before slipping away, her chest tight with sorrow and fury. Selina's appetite for risk seemed to grow with each passing hour. That afternoon, she persuaded Alexander to join her for a sailing trip aboard a private yacht owned by a wealthy acquaintance. The sun was high in the sky, painting the ocean with glimmers of gold. As they sailed, Selina draped a shawl over her shoulders and sipped expensive champagne, looking every inch the pampered socialite she had worked hard to become. Alexander attempted to relax, lulled by the gentle rocking of the boat, yet the knot in his stomach only tightened. He felt certain his phone was vibrating with calls from Diana, or texts demanding his immediate return, or perhaps the dreaded moment of confrontation. But he resisted checking it too often. He didn't want to raise Selina's suspicions. He told himself that this trip was a well-earned break, but deep inside, guilt festered like an open wound. Back at the resort, Diana had collapsed in her hotel room, consumed by a storm of emotions she could no longer hold at bay. Her hands shook as she reviewed the images she'd taken of Alexander and Selina. Every shot confirmed the unthinkable. Her husband was passionately entangled with another woman. Though she had suspected for weeks, actually seeing it with her own eyes plunged her into a grief she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. She tried to calm herself, reminding herself that an emotional meltdown could harm her baby. Yet heartbreak was a formidable foe. Determined to gather more evidence and possibly some kind of confession, she called Wilson Barnett, the private investigator. "I have photos," she whispered shakily, describing what she witnessed. Wilson insisted on meeting to discuss next steps. Perhaps they could collect witness statements or track Alexander's movements more comprehensively. As evening fell, Diana found herself in a discreet cafe near the harbor. Locals chatted animatedly, and steel drum music drifted from a nearby performer. Wilson arrived, greeted her politely, and they shared a quiet corner table. He was a wiry man with sharp features, a calm demeanor that hinted at years of experience in uncovering dirty secrets. She handed him her phone, letting him scroll through the damning photographs. He nodded somberly, taking notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "Miss S. Harrington," Wilson said, compassion flickering in his eyes. "This is enough to confront him or even pursue legal action. But if you want more dates, receipts, witness testimonies, I can keep digging." "Are you ready for that?" Diana hesitated, tears threatening to spill over. "I need to hear it from him," she said finally. "I need the truth straight from his mouth, but I also want to protect my baby." "I can't allow this stress to go on for long," Wilson nodded. "Understood. I'll be here for you as needed. Take care of yourself." Their conversation concluded with a plan. Diana would stay at her modest hotel, gather her resolve, and wait for the right moment to confront Alexander. Wilson would keep watch from a distance, ready to intervene or document any significant developments. Unbeknownst to them, fate was already in motion, propelling them all toward a collision more explosive than any of them could anticipate. Morning brought no relief. Diana awoke with a knot in her stomach and a dull headache throbbing behind her eyes. A few gentle kicks reminded her that her baby was growing, indifferent to the emotional storm consuming its parents. Determined to find some semblance of peace before the next step, Diana made her way to the beach for a private moment. Standing at the shoreline, the hem of her sundress brushing the wet sand, she gazed at the endless blue of the ocean. The rhythmic sound of waves provided a soothing counterpoint to the chaos in her mind. Closing her eyes, she breathed in the salty breeze. She whispered a prayer for strength for herself and for the life inside her. Midway through her silent reflection, her phone vibrated. Expecting a message from Wilson or Charlotte, she answered without looking at the caller ID. "Diana, it's Thomas Maxwell," the voice said, a note of urgency in his tone. "I've just been informed that something is happening with Harrington Enterprises. We're facing an aggressive takeover bid from an unexpected investor, and Alexander seems unreachable. Have you heard from him?" A spike of alarm shot through Diana. A corporate threat was the last thing she needed right now, but it explained why Thomas was panicking. Her mind spun. Should I tell him where Alexander really is? She hesitated. This was not her secret to reveal, nor was she sure it would help the situation. Instead, she feigned ignorance. "I don't know where he is, Thomas. Try calling his assistant, Natalie Parker. Perhaps she knows." Thomas sighed. "I already did. Natalie can't reach him either. I hate to ask, but if you do find him, please let him know this is urgent. Everything might be on the line here." Diana ended the call, unsettled by the new crisis. Could Alexander's empire be at risk? He had spent a lifetime building Harrington Enterprises, and now, at its most vulnerable moment, the CEO was off gallivanting with a mistress. Regardless of her heartbreak, a part of her didn't want to see everything he'd built come crashing down. Meanwhile, on a secluded yacht, Alexander and Selena were blissfully unaware of the brewing storm back in New York. They were lounging on the boat's deck, flipping through brochures for local island excursions. At that moment, Alexander's phone buzzed repeatedly in the cabin below, but he was too absorbed in the romance of the day to bother checking. Selena teased him about his workaholic tendencies, coaxing him to switch off from business concerns entirely. Oblivious to the phone calls piling up, he indulged in the fantasy that he could remain in this bubble of desire forever. But life seldom grants such reprieves. That evening, upon returning to the resort, Alexander finally glanced at his phone. A flood of missed calls and frantic messages from Thomas Maxwell and Natalie Parker made his stomach lurch. He excused himself from Selina's side, retreated to a corner of the suite, and made a hastily whispered phone call. Within minutes, the gravity of the corporate situation hit him like a tidal wave. His business and everything he'd worked for was under siege. Pale-faced, Alexander returned to Selina, trying to form coherent words. I need to step away for a few hours. There's a major issue at the company, he said, struggling to mask the alarm in his voice. Selina frowned, but before she could protest, he was out the door. In the near distance, Diana watched from a discreet perch, sensing a crack in the perfection of Alexander's facade. The next stage of the drama was about to unfold, catapulting them all into deeper turmoil than any of them had foreseen. Alexander hurried to the resort's business center, a sleek, glass-enclosed lounge equipped with high-speed internet and conference capabilities. His mind raced as he listened to Thomas Maxwell's frantic updates on the phone. Some mysterious investor operating under multiple shell companies was aggressively buying up shares of Harrington Enterprises, threatening Alexander's controlling stake. Thomas suspected it might be a ploy by a rival competitor looking to sabotage the company or force a merger. Sweat beaded on Alexander's forehead as he attempted to juggle calls to board members, financial advisors, and banks. The irony wasn't lost on him. While he had indulged in a secret escape with Selina, his empire was vulnerable to an orchestrated takedown. What a fool I've been, he thought bitterly. The calls dragged on, each conversation adding to his anxiety. Finally, he emerged from the business center just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Diana was waiting for him. She had spotted him earlier, recognized his tense posture, and followed him from a distance. Now, she stood near the fountain in the courtyard, a glittering spectacle lit by soft lights. Her heart pounded so loudly, she feared it might drown out any words she tried to speak. But she was resolute. She would confront him here, away from the prying eyes of other guests. When Alexander looked up and saw Diana pale, trembling, but visibly pregnant, his expression morphed from confusion to dread. "Diana?" he breathed, glancing around as if to confirm he wasn't hallucinating. "What are you doing here?" Diana locked eyes with him, her voice wavering despite her best efforts. "I could ask you the same question. I thought you were on a business trip alone. Then I see you here, in a suite, with another woman." Alexander's face paled. He opened his mouth, grasping for an excuse, but the words refused to come. His carefully constructed lies collapsed in on themselves. "Diana, let me explain." She cut him off, her voice rising with each syllable. "Explain what? That you left me pregnant at home so you could run off to a tropical paradise with some mistress?" Anger and hurt vibrated in every word. Tears streaked down Diana's cheeks. She held up her phone, the images of him and Selina displayed on the screen. "There's no denying it. I've seen it all. I have proof." Alexander reached out as though to console her, but she recoiled. "Don't touch me," she hissed, the pain in her eyes raw and blistering. Around them, a few curious onlookers began to notice the heated exchange. A couple of resort staff and tourists paused, uncertain whether to intervene. Sensing the weight of their stares, Alexander lowered his voice. "Please, let's go somewhere private to talk." Diana's tears glistened as she tried to steady her breathing. A part of her wanted to scream at him in public, to let the entire world witness his betrayal. But another part, protective of her dignity, and her child, nodded numbly. She turned on her heel, walking briskly toward a more secluded stretch of the courtyard. Alexander followed, his heart pounding with guilt and desperation. It was the first time they had faced each other since the truth came to light, and neither could predict what disasters or revelations this confrontation would unleash. Alexander guided Diana into a small gazebo bordered by tropical foliage, the rushing sound of a nearby waterfall masking their hushed voices. His mind scrambled for an explanation that might mitigate the damage. For a moment, neither spoke. They just stared at each other, a decade of memories and shared dreams now tinged with betrayal. "Diana," he began, voice shaking, "you have to know I never meant for this to hurt you. I got swept up. Work stress, pressure. I just needed an escape." Diana's eyes flashed with anger. "An escape? Is that what you call sleeping with another woman? You were supposed to be my husband, the father of our child. How could you?" As his wife's anguish hit him full force, Alexander felt his bravado unravel. Everything he had hoped to keep hidden was now laid bare, but part of him clung to the idea that he could salvage the situation. "I'll end it," he vowed, stepping forward. "I'll walk away from Selena, come home with you, and we can fix this. I promise. I just need time to—" "Don't," Diana spat, tears welling again. "Don't insult me by claiming you can fix this with more lies. You humiliated me, and you're risking our child's future." In the midst of their argument, the foliage rustled and Selena Moretti appeared, face twisted in confusion and fury. She had seen Alexander storm out earlier and, worried about the shift in his demeanor, had come searching. Stopping at the edge of the gazebo, she locked eyes with Diana, quickly realizing who she was. "Oh, so this is where you ran off to," Selena said, her Italian accent sharpening. She crossed her arms, scanning Diana's pregnant form with a mix of resentment and jealousy. "I guess something was off when you left me waiting in the suite without a single word." Alexander turned to Selena with a look of desperation. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed, his voice trembling. He wished for nothing more than to vanish into the ground. Diana glared at Selena, her protective instincts flaring. "So you're the woman who's been sleeping with my husband. Did you know he's married? That I'm carrying his child?" Selena tilted her chin defiantly. "I knew he was married, but you have no idea what your husband told me. He said your marriage was practically over. He said he was only staying with you out of obligation." Her accusation hung in the humid air, each word driving a wedge deeper between Diana and Alexander. The tension spiked to an almost unbearable level. Alexander, caught between the two women, tried to regain control. "Selena, that's not how things really are. But Selena wasn't interested in letting him off so easily. "He promised me a future," Selena snapped, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "He said he would handle everything with you, that I just needed to be patient. And now you show up here, pregnant and devastated." He lied to both of us. For a moment, Diana felt a jolt of sympathy for this mistress who also seemed betrayed. But the rage inside her was greater. "You both deserve each other," she choked out, spinning on her heel to leave. That was when a sudden sharp pain twisted through her abdomen, buckling her knees. Fear flickered in her eyes as she clutched her belly. Alexander rushed forward. "Diana, what's wrong?" he pleaded, genuine panic in his voice. Selena stood behind them, mouth agape, uncertain whether to intervene. Gasping in pain, Diana felt the world blur around her. She realized this was more than just an emotional meltdown. Something was physically wrong. In that instant, Alexander forgot all about the affair, the business crisis, and his crumbling lies. His wife carrying his child was in danger. He lifted her into his arms and bolted toward the main lobby, shouting for help. Selena watched, feeling a strange, conflicting cocktail of regret and resentment swirl inside her. The night of revelations had taken a darker turn than any of them could have foreseen. The resort's staff scrambled into action the moment they saw Alexander carrying Diana, her face contorted in pain. A manager named Samantha Quinn took charge, ordering an ambulance to the front gates. Guests parted to let them pass, their hushed whispers adding to the tension. Only hours ago, the opulence and tranquility of this place had felt like a paradise. Now, it was the backdrop of a crisis that overshadowed all else. Diana clung to Alexander's arm, her breathing ragged, tears cutting tracks down her cheeks. It was hard to distinguish her physical agony from her emotional distress. Alexander felt a tremor of guilt, convinced his betrayal and the confrontation had caused this. "Please hold on," he kept murmuring, as if sheer willpower could erase their predicament. In her blurred state, Diana registered that Selina was nowhere to be seen. Part of her was relieved. She couldn't bear the sight of the other woman, and every reminder of Alexander's infidelity felt like a knife twisting in her heart. Yet the next wave of pain shut out all thoughts, forcing her to focus on just surviving the moment. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics carefully lifted Diana onto a stretcher. Alexander climbed in beside her, uncharacteristically disheveled and frantic. Sirens wailed as they sped through Nassau's streets to the nearest hospital. The bright lights, the clang of equipment, and the frenzied activity in the emergency room formed a surreal tableau that refused to align with the reality. Alexander knew one where he was in control, always. Back at the resort, Selina retreated to the penthouse suite. Shaken and alone, she paced the living room. Guilt warred with jealousy, overshadowed by fear that she might have just lost her chance with Alexander. She poured herself a glass of wine, but even that offered no comfort. Thoughts churned. What if Diana loses the baby? Would that push him further away or bring them closer? She cursed herself for thinking in such cruel terms, but the question lingered, raw and undeniable. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the doctors attended to Diana with swift efficiency. They administered medication to calm her contractions, explaining in quick, direct terms that stress and emotional upheaval could trigger such episodes. Alexander hovered nearby, his hands trembling as he waited for any sign that his wife and unborn child were safe. After what felt like an eternity, a physician approached him. "Mr. Harrington, your wife is stable for now. We've managed to reduce the contractions. She's asking for you." Relief flooded Alexander, but dread followed close behind. The conversation he and Diana were about to have would likely decide their future. He found her lying on a hospital bed, pale and worn, yet with a resolve in her gaze that told him she hadn't forgiven him. She gestured for him to sit. He sank into the chair by her bedside, words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "I can't even begin to tell you how sorry I am." Diana stared at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to understand something, Alexander. Nothing you can say will erase what you did. But right now, all I care about is this baby. If you want to be part of our lives, you need to figure out who you are, what you truly want, and whether you can ever be honest again." Her ultimatum hung in the sterile hospital air, a challenge that felt far more daunting to Alexander than any hostile corporate takeover. He reached out to touch her hand. She let him, but her gaze remained fixed and resolute. In that moment, both of them realized that the glamorous facade of their marriage had been irreparably cracked. The night had changed everything, and no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same. Diana remained in the hospital overnight for observation. Alexander never left her side, foregoing sleep to watch the steady rise and fall of her chest. Each beep of the monitor reminded him how fragile life could be and how easily he had placed both Diana and their child at risk. As dawn broke, a nurse reassured them the danger had passed, provided Diana minimized stress and got adequate rest. Thomas Maxwell, having learned of Diana's hospitalization, booked the next available flight to the Bahamas. He arrived mid-morning, flustered and loaded with documents that required Alexander's urgent attention. The corporate threat had escalated, shares were still being bought up, and Alexander's stake in Harrington Enterprises was under siege. Sequestered in a quiet corner of the hospital, they discussed strategies to halt the takeover, including the possibility of finding a white knight investor. It was a sobering conversation, But Alexander's priorities were painfully clear: keep the company afloat and ensure Diana's well-being. Once Thomas departed to make calls, Alexander returned to Diana's bedside, bracing for the conversation he dreaded yet needed to have. He began with a confession of how his affair started, his justifications, his loneliness, his twisted belief he deserved some reprieve from the pressures of business. He spoke haltingly, voice trembling with remorse. "I never meant for it to go this far," he insisted, "but I was fooling myself." Diana listened in silence, her eyes never leaving his face. She didn't interrupt, and when he finished, she let a long pause stretch between them. Finally she spoke, her voice low and steady. "Do you expect me to forgive you? Forget all of this? Go back to our old life and pretend it never happened?" Alexander shook his head, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. "No, I know I've broken us. I just hope eventually you'll see that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make amends, for the sake of our child, if nothing else." She exhaled a shuddering breath. "I want what's best for this baby. That's all I can think about right now." Then, to Alexander's surprise, she placed a hand over his. "But I need space. I need time. You have a lot of work to do on yourself if you ever want me to trust you again." Her words were far from absolution, but they held a hint of possibility. For the first time since the confrontation, Alexander felt a glimmer of hope. He knew he had a steep mountain to climb, one that would require cutting off all contact with Selina, repairing his business, and perhaps seeking therapy or counsel to address his deep-seated issues. That afternoon, Diana was discharged, with strict orders to rest. She insisted on checking into a private suite at a nearby hotel rather than returning to the resort. The thought of walking through Orchid K's hallways, where memories of Alexander's affair haunted every corner, was more than she could handle. Alexander respected her decision, though he longed to keep her close for peace of mind. Back at Orchid K, Selina waited in vain for his return. As hours slipped by, worry and anger grew inside her like a storm. She tried calling him, only to reach voicemail. Each time, the silence on the other end of the line felt like an indictment of her choices, her illusions. When darkness fell again, Selina realized she was no longer a priority. With her eyes burning from shed tears, she made a decision that would impact all of them. She would not go quietly into the background. Diana spent the next few days recuperating in the private hotel suite, visited regularly by medical staff to monitor her condition. She also confided in Charlotte Williams over the phone, recounting the ugly truth she had discovered. Charlotte's empathy and willingness to listen provided a lifeline during Diana's darkest hours. Though the betrayal was raw, Diana felt a flicker of relief knowing she had faced it head-on, rather than living in ignorant dread. Alexander divided his time between urgent business calls with Thomas Maxwell and cautious, supportive visits to Diana. Though she allowed him to accompany her during medical checkups, she maintained an emotional distance. He noticed the way she would recoil slightly if he stood too close, or how her gaze would drop whenever he attempted to catch her eye. The weight of guilt pressed harder on him every day. Meanwhile, the corporate situation improved. With Thomas's legal expertise, they exposed the shell companies buying the shares and discovered a conglomerate run by a longtime rival, William Henry. Using a mix of legal injunctions and strategic stock buybacks from loyal investors, Alexander managed to thwart the takeover, albeit at a considerable financial cost. For the time being, Harrington Enterprises remained under his control, but the entire ordeal served as a harsh reminder of how swiftly fortunes could change. One afternoon, Selina Moretti burst into the lobby of Diana's hotel. Determined to see Alexander, she bypassed the concierge and marched toward the elevators. The manager quickly intervened, insisting she identify whom she intended to visit. Her raised voice and insistent manner attracted the attention of staff and guests alike. When the manager threatened to call security, she backed down, leaving a wave of hushed gossip in her wake. Later that evening, Alexander received a barrage of furious texts from Selena, accusing him of abandoning her, breaking promises, and ruining her reputation. The final message read, "You haven't heard the last from me. If I can't have you, I'll make sure everyone knows your secrets." The implication was clear. Selena was prepared to go public with their affair. Shaken, Alexander locked himself in his suite, staring at the screen. He realized the precariousness of his situation. One leak to the press could start a scandal that would decimate his already fragile marriage, not to mention the reputation of Harrington Enterprises, and Selena, feeling scorned, had little to lose. Nevertheless, Alexander knew what he had to do, put his wife and unborn child first. If the cost of protecting them meant facing public shame or paying a steep settlement, so be it. He drafted a terse reply. "I'm sorry for what I've done. I will make restitution if needed. But I choose my family. Please respect that." He sent it, feeling equal parts relief and dread. That night, Diana, from her separate hotel room, felt the baby kick more strongly than ever before. She pressed a hand to her stomach and whispered, "We'll be okay." Whether or not Alexander truly changed, she had found a kernel of strength within herself that she never knew existed. And whatever the future held, she promised to face it with clarity and self-respect. In the days to come, each of the major players, Alexander, Diana, and Selena, would confront pivotal decisions. Some would stand by love and duty, others by ambition or spite. Yet the ultimate outcome would hinge on how they reconciled the darkest truths of their hearts. In the face of a life-altering scandal that refused to stay buried. Several weeks later, Alexander sat in the conference room of Harrington Enterprises in New York, going through the final paperwork that severed all business ties with Selena Moretti. To avoid a public scandal, he had agreed to buy out her spa franchise at a fair price, and she, in turn, signed a strict non-disclosure agreement. The entire process was fraught with tension, but Selena ultimately accepted. The last time Alexander saw her, she walked out with a folder in hand, shoulders squared. She left without a word or a backward glance, as if determined to erase him from her future ambitions. Diana, for her part, decided not to file for divorce immediately. Instead, she moved back to the Harrington mansion under the condition that she and Alexander live separately within it. She had her own suite of rooms. Complete with a small nursery, she began preparing for the baby. She preferred this arrangement to isolating herself somewhere unfamiliar. In her heart, she remained deeply conflicted. Alexander's betrayal had devastated her, but she also recognized that he was genuinely trying to earn her trust again. Days turned into weeks, and gradually Diana observed small changes in her husband. He sought therapy to address his impulses and the sense of invincibility that had led him astray. He became more transparent about his business dealings, offering her detailed accounts of his activities, perhaps overcompensating, but she appreciated the honesty, however belated. They attended counseling sessions together, which were uncomfortable at first. The sessions forced them to confront painful questions. What led you to seek solace outside your marriage? What fears or unmet needs drove each of you to this breaking point? Tears were shed, accusations flung, but amidst the turmoil, seeds of empathy emerged. Diana began to see the cracks in Alexander's persona, an insecure man, fearful of losing control. He, in turn, saw how his wife had silently carried the emotional weight of their marriage for years. When their baby girl was born a month earlier than expected, due to Diana's complications, Alexander was in the delivery room, holding Diana's hand through every contraction. Their daughter, whom they named Isabel, entered the world with a tiny cry that shattered the last of Diana's emotional barriers. As nurses rushed to stabilize the premature infant, Alexander wept openly, apologizing again and again for the pain he'd caused. Diana, exhausted, drenched in sweat, reached out and squeezed his hand, sharing a wordless moment of both heartbreak and hope. It wasn't a magical fix. Even in the weeks following Isabel's birth, the memory of Alexander's affair lingered like a bruise that refused to fully heal. Diana had allowed him to be part of Isabel's life, but she kept him at a distance, unsure if her heart could ever truly mend. Yet seeing him cradle their daughter, singing lullabies in a shaky voice at 2 a.m, sparked a cautious flicker of faith. In time, they would decide whether to remain together or part ways. For now, the Harrington family forged a fragile unity, knowing that trust, once broken, requires a slow, painstaking rebuild. Selina Moretti continued her career elsewhere, forging new paths that would have nothing to do with the Harrington empire. But the imprint of her presence remained, a sober reminder that even the mightiest towers can crumble when built on deception. Life pressed on, day by day, breath by breath. For Alexander, Diana, and little Isabel, the future stood like a second chance, uncertain, complicated, but undeniably theirs to shape. This story of secrets, betrayal, and a brush with heartbreak reminds us that even the most glamorous lives can mask deep cracks. Alexander learned that wealth and power offer no shield against the consequences of lies. Diana discovered untapped reserves of strength within herself, realizing that the pursuit of truth can be painful, yet also a catalyst for rebirth. And in the aftermath, each character faced the choice of transforming their pain into growth or letting it consume them. If you found yourself immersed in the twists and turns of this tale, please consider giving a thumbs up or leaving a comment below. Share this video with friends who love gripping drama, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories that delve into the heart of human emotions, choices, and consequences. Your support helps keep these narratives alive. Thank you for being part of this storytelling journey.